Thanks for joining us. You're watching Eye on Africa here on France 24. I'm Julia Kim. These are the headlines on the continent. Duduzane Zuma proclaims his innocence at an inquiry investigating his father's massive graft scandals. The son of Jacob Zuma says he is the victim of a political storm. For the first time since February, Algeria's police prevent students from taking part in their usual Tuesday protest. Several journalists were also arrested. And some good news for cancer patients in Senegal. Since the beginning of this month, chemotherapy for breast and cervical cancer have been free of charge. Our team went to find out more. I am not corrupt, says the son of former South African President Jacob Zuma, as Duduzane Zuma wrapped up his two-day testimony before a judicial inquiry known as state capture. The investigation is looking into claims of graft during his father's 9 years in office and is part of a wider anti-corruption campaign by President Cyril Ramaphosa. The 35-year-old is accused of acting as a conduit for a wealthy Indian family, the Guptas, who were granted lucrative state contracts by the former president before multiple graft scandals forced him out of office. France 24's Aisha Ismail has the latest from Cape Town.
Duduzane Zuma maintains he's innocent, and as you say, he says that he's not corrupt and he's been caught up in a political storm. But it's common knowledge that he had or still has very close ties to the Gupta family. He was a business partner of the Guptas. He spent a lot of time with them. And the Gupta family was also very close to his father, former President Jacob Zuma. And the allegation against Duduzane Zuma and the reason why he was called to testify before the Zondo Commission of Inquiry is because a deputy minister alleged that he was called to a meeting at the home of the Guptas, or at the Gupta compound, where Duduzane Zuma was present, and where this deputy cabinet minister was offered a position of a minister, offered a position of finance minister, and he was also offered 600 million rand to accept that position. And it's believed that this family was so powerful and influential that they were able to influence the position or the appointment of people into strategic positions so that they could then win lucrative government tenders. And so Duduzane was called to the Zondo Commission of Inquiry to come and testify about this. But of course, he maintains his innocence. His father was also called to testify before the Zondo Commission. And it would appear that everybody who has been called to the Zondo Commission is now saying that they are innocent. And at the end of the day, the Zondo Commission of Inquiry is not a court of law. It's a commission of inquiry, and they're inquiring into allegations of corruption and state capture.
Now, this, of course, is part of a drive by current President Cyril Ramaphosa, an anti-corruption campaign. How effective has this campaign against corruption been?
Well, since last year, we've seen dozens of people being called to testify and to appear before the Zondo Commission of Inquiry. And these were government officials. Some of them were cabinet ministers, and some of them were people who held very senior positions in state-owned enterprises. And we know, of course, that the corruption over the years, during the Zuma years, caused the country billions and cost the country billions of rand. And so the Commission of Inquiry is trying to get to the bottom of this so that these people will have to be held accountable for all the money that has been lost over the years. Some of them will be criminally charged. But as I said earlier, this is the Zondo Commission is a commissioner of inquiry. Once the commission wraps up its work, it will then present its findings to the National Prosecuting Authority, who then has to decide who will be prosecuted criminally and who will not be prosecuted, and whether these people will be held accountable and appear in a court of law.
Mozambican police said 4 members of one of its own elite units were involved in the murder of an EU election observer. 58-year-old Anastasio Matavele was shot dead on Monday in the southeastern province of Gaza, a ruling party stronghold. The EU has condemned the assassination, which comes 1 week before presidential polls. The vote is being seen as the first test of the landmark peace deal signed in August between the government and former rebels. President Felipe Nyusi's Frelimo party is widely expected to secure a second term. Now, staying in Mozambique, President Nyusi's re-election campaign has been given a boost after petrol giant ExxonMobil approved a massive liquefied natural gas project in Mozambique. The US company has pledged to invest over $500 million in the oil-rich Cabo Delgado province. The region is grappling with a militant insurgency that's left over 300 dead in the past 2 years. Mozambique's army today confirmed that it had killed 9 jihadists operating in the area. But many are wondering whether the region is safe for business. One of the poorest countries in the world, chronic insecurity has hampered Mozambique's path to economic recovery. But the incumbent president hopes that today's deal will soon change that. Take a listen.
This is the path that will enable rural families to move from subsistence farming to commercial farming, producing more by improving the support infrastructure to move their products to the market, thus improving the quality of life for all Mozambicans. They are countries that have had natural resources for many years, but most of their population remains poor. We want to and we must make a difference.
Well, let's turn now to Algeria, where for the first time since February, police have prevented students from taking part in their usual Tuesday protest. Anti-riot officers blocked demonstrators from assembling at the Central Post Office, the iconic point of assembly for the protest movement. It's rejected fresh elections announced for December, vowing to continue demonstrations until the political system is overhauled. Nicolas Germain reports.
Students in Algeria have been protesting every Tuesday since February, but this time the police tried to stop them. Several people were arrested, including journalists. Demonstrators tried to go around the security forces, but in the end the police dispersed them.
The head of the army is trying to stop these protests. He's arresting citizens, even old women and old men.
We are protesting against the election in December. We will not let them organize it. We don't want this military regime. We want to be a free democracy with a civilian government.
We spoke to the Algerian League for the Defense of Human Rights.
Today, the police used violence against demonstrators and journalists. They wanted to intimidate them. This does not bode well for the country. They are preparing a presidential election, but you can't have an election in a context of terror, violence and constraint. In our view, this election is already discredited because of these practices.
In April, former President Abdelaziz Bouteflika resigned following massive protests. He had been in power for 20 years. Since then, the country's de facto leader is the head of the army, Ahmed Gaid Salah. He wants a presidential election on December the 12th. But protesters said it once again on Tuesday. They don't believe the current government will organize a transparent poll. And one of their main demands is the resignation of Gaid Salah, who was a key figure of the Bouteflika system.
And finally, some good news for cancer sufferers in Senegal. From the 1st of October, patients have benefited from free chemotherapy for breast and cervical cancer. Although government subsidies don't extend to all cancer treatments, the cost of some have been reduced by 60%. France 24's team visited the only chemotherapy centre in the Senegalese capital.
36-year-old Diawo has cervical cancer. Her sister Adama comes with her to the hospital Le Dantec in Dakar. It's the first time that she's come to the cancer clinic since it was announced that chemotherapy drugs would be free.
Chemotherapy was very expensive. It was difficult. We had to pay 25,000 francs here, 50,000 francs there, 20,000 more on top of that. Today I've come here and the treatment is free.
Until now, Diawo paid around €100 every 3 weeks to have access to chemotherapy. A fortune for the mother of 8, who depended entirely on her relatives' financial support, like the majority of patients.
I didn't even have enough money to pay my transport to get here. At home, it's rare that we eat 3 times a day. So you can imagine how difficult it's been for me to be treated.
The government subsidy on cancer treatment is for chemotherapy only. Surgery or even radiotherapy remains at the patient's cost. The medical team at the clinic believes, nonetheless, it's a start that will make all the difference for some patients.
We hadn't heard from around 30% of patients, and when we called them, they said they couldn't afford to come and follow their chemotherapy, especially as often as they needed to come and do it.
A lot still needs to be done for these patients, says the Senegalese League Against Cancer. The non-profit is now pushing the government to focus on breast cancer prevention.
They can reduce the cost of a mammogram. For cervical cancer, they can focus and inform the public so that children from the age of 9 can be vaccinated and then get a checkup for cervical cancer.
Around 2,500 new cases of breast and cervical cancer are diagnosed in Senegal every year.
And that's it from us. There's more news coming up shortly. Stay tuned to France 24.